Okay.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Good morning, my name's Tom Harwood and this is The Briefing on GB News. Live this morning, we're exploring what exactly the Chancellor is up to. Some call him the new Prime Minister. We're expecting a statement coming this morning and then a statement to the Commons coming this afternoon. What could it contain? What bits of the mini-budget, frankly, are there left to rip up? Today, we explore it all after the headlines.
A very good morning, it's 9:30. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date today on GB News. The newly appointed Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, is preparing to deliver parts of his medium-term economic plan today. Now, that's a fortnight earlier than we expected. He's been in talks with the Prime Minister over the weekend, as well as the Bank of England, the Governor of the Bank of England, the Debt Management Office, to brief them on his plans. Well, Jeremy Hunt will make a statement this morning and then he'll address the House of Commons later. Of course, we'll bring that all to you here on GB News. He's going to be setting out the measures which the Treasury says will set out fiscal sustainability. The Treasury says the plans will be released in full at the end of this month. The Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury told us that a fourth Tory Chancellor in 4 months isn't going to fix the UK economy.
You can't recover from the kind of ideological recklessness that led to where we are this morning just by appointing a new Chancellor and announcing some partial U-turns. The situation's more serious than that.
Well, GB News has learnt that officers of the 1922 committee will meet later amid growing calls from some Conservative MPs for the Prime Minister to step down. Now, the committee's executives can change the rules of leadership balloting and no confidence voting, which could lead to a leadership challenge. 3 Conservative MPs have publicly called for Ms Truss to resign. Other news now, and Metropolitan Police Commissioner Sir Mark Rowley says hundreds of police officers should be sacked following the findings of a new report that was commissioned after the murder of Sarah Everard. Well, a review of the Met's internal misconduct system, Baroness Louise Casey, found officers are getting away with, quote, criminal behaviour. The report described some of the police procedures as racist and misogynistic. In international news, and the Ukrainian Air Force say they've shot down 37 Russian drones in the last 24 hours. The capital, Kyiv, this morning has been hit with several explosions caused by these so-called kamikaze drones. The Kyiv mayor, Vitaly Klitschko, says several residential buildings have been damaged and there have been fires in a central district of the city. No casualties have been reported. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. It's GB News. Now let's head back to Tom for this morning's briefing.
Good morning, it's 9:33 and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. Now, this morning, a surprise release from the Treasury, of course. We were expecting that medium-term fiscal statement to come about in 2 weeks' time. But today, a statement expected from the new Chancellor this morning. Followed by a statement to Parliament, of course, this afternoon, around 3:30, we expect. The new Chancellor seems to be calling the shots today when it comes to government policy. Some MPs have taken to calling him the man behind the curtain, the real Prime Minister. It's likely almost every measure of Kwasi Kwarteng's mini-budget will be ripped away, save for the national insurance tax cut and the minor stamp duty measures. Rumours are even swirling this morning that the energy price guarantee could be for the chop, with more targeted schemes coming in to replace it in year 2. Well, let's discuss everything that's taking place today with our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan. Liam, why so soon? 2 weeks before we were expecting many of these announcements. Why today?
I think there are financial market reasons, Tom, and also political reasons. The financial market reasons are that there's a sense that sterling is vulnerable. There's a sense that as the war in Ukraine carries on, Britain has unique issues when it comes to exposure to a lack of energy, given that we import a lot of our energy and we've got very little gas storage. If the price of gas spikes, then we will be spending a lot of money on the European spot market. A lot of the other big European countries, they've stored lots and lots of gas. They've got more physical storage than we have. And I think the political reasons are that Jeremy Hunt and his team, and being no doubt there's a team, and Rishi Sunak and his team, there are lots of warring factions now in the Conservative Party. They want to show who is in charge. There's not a lot of face saving going on here for the kind of Truss, the rump of the Truss government, or indeed for Kwasi Kwarteng, who must be feeling pretty sick this morning.
And you describe it as the rump of the Truss government, because, of course, we saw that fiscal statement, what was it, 3 weeks ago now, and bit by bit, in sort of snack-sized chunks, it's been taken away. We're not expecting much of it to be standing at all. Does the Prime Minister have any authority this morning?
Well, let's be clear, Tom, you've been very careful in your broadcasting and writing, I've noticed over recent weeks, to really spell out the various aspects of the mini-budget, and we should do that. Look, by far and away the most important part of the mini-budget from the fiscal point of view, the spending point of view, was the energy price cap. No one's even debating that. Labour fully endorsed that. Plus the reduction in national insurance. No one's even debating that. Labour endorsed that. In fact, it's about to go through the final stage of Parliament. Labour also endorsed fully the cut in the basic rate of income tax. So,
which now looks like today will be reversed. In some ways today, we might end up with this peculiar situation where the government opposes more of the mini-budget than the opposition does.
Indeed, and the point I was going to make is once you've got, the energy price cap, the national insurance cut, and Labour supporting the cut in the basic rate of income tax, until now, they're supporting like 90% of the mini-budget. Now, of course, the bit that the press and broadcasters aligned on, understandably, was that very ill-timed, politically tin-eared cut in the top rate of tax from 45 to 40%. But even that, you shouldn't do that in the middle of a cost of living crisis. But even that is taking the top rate of tax back to where it was under Blair and Brown. And it was they're hardly, ultra right-wing libertarians, are they?
I want to bring in now the statement that the International Monetary Fund brought about on the 27th of September. I believe we can bring it up on our screens now. It criticised the measures the government was taking, but something that a lot of people missed, right in the middle of that statement there. We do not recommend large and untargeted fiscal packages at this juncture. When people read that statement 3 weeks ago in the middle of Labour conference, they were saying that the IMF is saying that the government shouldn't go ahead with these tax cuts. But reading that line in the middle of that statement, that doesn't sound like it's talking about tax cuts.
Political journalists they read headlines, they don't read statements. With all respect, you're a political journalist. I might say you're a pretty analytical political journalist, unlike many of our colleagues elsewhere. At the same time, the IMF said, oh, by the way, Britain's going to be the fastest growing economy in the G7, which went almost unreported.
But specifically on this measure, large and untargeted spending measures, clearly that's talking about the energy price guarantee. And this morning we're hearing some rumours that might be curtailed. It might be 1 year rather than 2 years. It might be more targeted in the second year. I suppose we'll have to wait for what the Chancellor has to say. But if the Tories then say we're going to have a more targeted, help the poor, leave the rich to pay more situation, and the Labour Party is supporting this 2-year price guarantee, suddenly we enter a very interesting space.
Politics turned on its head. I think that's right. And look, the energy price cap, no one knows anything about the energy price cap because the energy price cap, how much it costs, is determined entirely by the wholesale price of gas between now and over the next 2 years. The path of the wholesale price of gas. If you are guaranteeing to deliver a per unit cost of gas and electricity, and the electricity price is linked to the gas price, as we've often explained, then despite what happens on wholesale markets, the government has to subsidise the energy providers of the difference between the wedge between the wholesale price and that guaranteed retail per unit price. How much that will cost depends on when the wholesale price of gas is. It could cost £200 billion. It could cost nothing. We don't know. And that's why I've said many, many times what the markets were really spooked by was the energy price cap. What political pundits and people standing in front of the Bank of England who don't know what they're talking about keeps talking about was the fact that the Tories want to lower tax for the top 2% of earners. Kwarteng and Truss made a cardinal error. Because they went for that top rate of tax cut, it allowed their policies to be presented as radical and extreme, whereas in many ways their policies were pretty moderate.
And perhaps the most extreme thing is that spending, that £200 billion potential of spending, fixing energy prices. Well, Liam, thank you so much for that. Excellent analysis of where we are. Liam's going to be with us for the next 2 hours as well as we explore this extraordinary morning in British politics. But I'm pleased now to be joined by the Conservative MP who ran the new Chancellor's leadership campaign over the summer. Yes, Philip Dunn ran Jeremy Hunt's leadership campaign. He's a former health minister himself and now chairs the Environmental Audit Committee. Philip, thank you for joining us this morning. I suppose the first question here is Jeremy Hunt the new Prime Minister already?
No, Jeremy Hunt was appointed as Chancellor on Friday. I think it was a very wise appointment by the Prime Minister, and he spent the weekend ensconced with her at Chequers, working out the measures that need to be taken to provide stability to financial markets and to the credibility of the government. And we will be hearing this morning, I think there'll be a statement at 11, and then he'll be speaking to the House at 3:30 about what steps he intends to take. I think it was, again, wise of the Prime Minister and the Chancellor to bring forward their statement from the 31st, the end of the month, 31st of October to today, in order to provide some clarity and certainty about what aspects of the previous mini-budget will be taken forward.
It does seem that all of the proposals from Liz Truss, even some of the largest proposals on which she was elected as Conservative Party leader and therefore Prime Minister, have now been ditched. Is the person who is really calling the shots here now Jeremy Hunt?
Well, I think the whole issue has come about because there was uncosted proposals, unfunded proposals, which was what was spooking the markets. And I think what was clear from what Jeremy Hunt said over the weekend in his media round is that the direction of travel remains as set out by the Prime Minister. It's the speed and the pace at which these measures can be taken which will be determined by the ability of the economy to afford it. And that's why the sort of focus on growth remains at front and central of what the government is seeking to deliver.
Our minds back to July, when there was a much broader set of candidates for the leadership election. Of course, it was a very rapid set of whittling down there. But you ran Jeremy Hunt's leadership campaign, and in that campaign, he promised to reduce the level of corporation tax from 19% to 15%, saying it was a necessary pro-business move to get the economy going and saying it would be funded through greater economic growth. It sounds almost Trussian in its optimism. How does that square with Jeremy Hunt as Chancellor now, raising corporation tax?
Well, I think, as I was saying, he shares the Prime Minister's view that we need to be a low-tax economy. It's very much his mantra throughout his time in politics is to try to make the UK a very attractive place to bring business and investment into the UK, and having a low tax rate across various types of taxation is an important element of that in bringing new business into the UK. I think it's entirely consistent. I think what's changed, of course, between the early July, and remember, I'm afraid his campaign didn't last very long, so I did a lot more in the previous campaign in 2019 when he was in the final with Boris Johnson.
And then he was proposing to reduce corporation tax down to 12.5%, not 15, but 12.5%, matching the Republic of Ireland. That was even more radical in terms of a tax-cutting measure.
Well, I think what I was about to go on to say was that circumstances have changed over the last 2 months, and he absolutely recognises he needs to deal with the reality of today in his new role as Chancellor. And today's reality is that there is a fiscal gap between the government's spending plans and revenue-generating plans, and that has to be closed. And that's what I think we'll be hearing about today, and then when the OBR reports in due course.
Now, looking at the gilt markets this morning, it does look like the yields are coming down. Borrowing is becoming slightly cheaper for the government now. The pound has strengthened ever so slightly as well. The economics of how the markets receive government policy may well be shoring up. Can the politics, however, follow the markets, or is the situation, is the view of the Conservative Party in the minds of the British public now irrecoverably broken?
Well, I think we've seen a lot of volatility over the last 5 or 6 weeks. Well, you could say over the last year or so in the fortunes of all the political parties, and we've seen that political parties go up and can come down rapidly these days. It's in the era of 24 News, programmes like yours, Tom, which is helping to shape opinion. Opinions change more quickly than they used to do. So I think we can absolutely recover from this. What the government needs is a period of stability and calm. The appointment of Jeremy Hunt is a key element to that, and we'll see what happens over the next week or two. But I'm not going to sit here and join this very small number of voices calling for the Prime Minister to go. I think that's the last thing we need at the moment. We need a period of calm and stable government.
Yes, as you mentioned, 3 of your colleagues publicly calling on the Prime Minister to go, although great speculation that rather more of them privately doing the same thing. Let's see if that stability actually stays or if something more happens. It's been a dramatic morning already, but for now, Philip Dunn, thank you so much for joining us on the briefing this morning. Really appreciate your time. Let's get some immediate reaction now with Liam Halligan. It was interesting listening to Philip Dunn there, saying that the circumstances have changed and therefore the policy needed to change. In your view, does that stack up?
Well, the economic facts on the ground have changed because, we're a capitalist society and governments borrow money, and that means investors need to have confidence in the government. And if our political class is imploding, then it raises legitimate questions about governance. I'm just watching the gilt yield here, Tom. Who'd have thought you and I would be sitting on national television talking about gilt yields? I mean, but this is where we are. And they have come down slightly from around 4.3% to 4%.
And in plain English...
Ticked up slightly in the last few minutes back towards 4.1. And why does this stuff matter? This stuff matters because we all talk about the Bank of England base rate, but really the Bank of England base rate follows. It doesn't really set, it follows what goes on in financial markets. The 10-year gilt yield, the amount of money, the interest the government must pay per year to borrow money for 10 years, about 4%, and then, of course, it pays back the whole thing. That sets the benchmark for all lending in the economy, because by definition, if you think about it, the government should be able to borrow most cheaply, because it's the government.
Yes.
Right? So if the 10-year gilt yield is 4%, no mortgage can be below that. Right. And then on top of that, the financial services industry, it's sort of competitive, but not really. It adds its margin and maybe the mortgage advisor and all the rest of it. So that's why mortgage rates are more like 5.5%, 6% now. And then there's the risk you may default. And that means personal loans, because there's no property to secure the loan on. If it's a personal loan, that then goes up to 7 or 8%. And when you think that just a few months ago, people were getting mortgages at 2 or 3% and personal loans at 3 or 4%. And now, it's 6 or 7% or 7 and 8%. And if you have a pretty chunky mortgage or a pretty big personal loan, a lot of people went into debt during COVID. A lot of people have chunky mortgages because houses have been so expensive. You can see that interest rates have basically doubled so far this year. And for many people, that is the issue. And that, I think, is one reason why the political class is now doing everything it can to try and stop interest rates rising. But as I've said many times, this is a long-term trend, and no one can stop interest rates rising to some degree.
Really sounds like a sort of Midas moment. No, not Midas. Who am I thinking? Canute.
Canute.
King Canute. Not turning things to gold, but holding back the sea. There we go. Well, let's continue this conversation now. I'm delighted to be joined by Elliot Keck from the Taxpayers Alliance. Of course, the Taxpayers Alliance, one of those organisations that was supportive of the budget, or at least a large degree of that mini-budget several weeks ago, which now seems to have been torn limb from limb. Elliot Keck, what's your view of the U-turns that we've seen already, the two we've seen already, and perhaps the dozen more we're expecting today?
Well, hello, Tom. It's deeply disappointing. I think there was, for a very brief moment, there was a glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel for taxpayers who have been hit with a 70-year tax high over the last few months. And that glimmer of light looks to have been almost completely extinguished. We still have the reversal to the national insurance increase, and that's a good thing. And there was the increase in the national insurance personal tax allowance earlier this year. But nevertheless, this will still come as devastating news to people that are really struggling with the cost of government crisis.
Given that there is, as you describe, a cost of government crisis, given that there is, of course, this 70-year high tax burden, I believe we can show a graph to those watching on television of just what the tax burden has been doing over the last few decades. So those watching on television can see the blue line. That's the tax burden before the mini-budget. You can see it ticks right up there in recent years, skyrocketing to this 70-year high. People may well be able to notice a little orange line. That orange line is where the tax burden would have gone had the tax cuts in the mini-budget been implemented in full. Still a higher tax burden than almost any year since 2018. Elliot Keck, why is it impossible to reduce our tax burden to where it was even only a few years ago?
Well, I mean, it's an extraordinary graph, and it does make you wonder if the political class view taxpayers' money as belonging to the government and not belonging to consumers and households. And as that graph showed, these tax changes would have brought things back to where they were 3-4 years ago. Already a situation in which taxes were causing a huge amount of strain on British people.
And yet what should be done then? Because clearly the markets really want some fiscal consolidation. Clearly the cost of borrowing for the government is higher, and potentially cancelling some of these tax cuts this morning may well be making that cost of borrowing lower. Is it your suggestion that we should instead cut some of this historically high government spending?
Well, you mentioned that we welcomed the mini-budget, and we did welcome it in large part. But we made two criticisms of the mini-budget. One was particularly of the energy plan and its completely uncosted nature. And I think, if you look at the broader, this is a point you've made a number of times, if you look at the whole package of the mini-budget, by far and away the biggest commitment and by far and away the biggest impact on borrowing was the energy price plan. And that's something that was threatened to run into the tens of billions, if not hundreds of billions of pounds. And that's one area where absolutely the government needs to look at and needs to see if it can be done in a far more efficient and cost-effective way where it targets those on the lowest incomes.
Really, really interesting stuff there. Well, Elliot Keck from the Taxpayers Alliance, thank you for joining us this morning. We're going to jump straight to our next guest now. John Longworth is a former MEP, and of course he was director of the British Chambers of Commerce. That was until he declared his support for Brexit and left the organisation. John Longworth, thank you for joining us this morning. I'm really interested in your view here of the sort of macroeconomic picture and how the government has handled itself in the last 3 weeks. It's a mess, isn't it?
It is a bit of a mess. I mean, I'm still fighting the good fight as chairman of the Independent Business Network of Family Businesses. And that network was very, very keen on the growth agenda. We didn't recommend the top rate tax cut. In fact, we were very surprised when it happened. And we were not, of course, asking for the support on energy. In fact, what we were asking for was that energy costs should be cut by producing fossil fuels in the UK as a bridge to the net zero objective. So that would have actually really got Truss and Kwarteng out of the mess that they've got themselves into. It is quite remarkable. Always difficult to follow Liam, of course, because he's such an expert and gives a masterclass in macroeconomics. And it was Liam, of course, that said in one of his articles before the budget that the gnomes of Zurich wouldn't like it. And so, in fact, he has been proved correct.
Well, Liam is sitting next to me now, and I wonder if you would respond to that there now, the gnomes of Zurich.
Thanks, John. My usual fee. Look, John Longworth represents, the kind of the inner workings of British business. He used to run the British Chamber of Commerce. He's now chairman of the Independent Business Network. These are small and medium-sized firms, Tom. As you know, they account for half of our GDP, 2/3 of our employment. And after this mini-budget, even though they were a little bit kind of queasy about the politics of the lowering the top rate of tax, the IOD, the Institute of Directors, the CBI, the Confederation of British Industry, the British Chamber of Commerce, and John's own Independent Business Network, they all said, hooray, this is great, though they all saw the cardinal political mistake that Truss and Kwarteng were making with the top rate of tax. Now, I talked about the gnomes of Zurich. They're not sort of little men from Harry Potter who happen to live in Switzerland. The gnomes of Zurich was a phrase that came out when John and I were kids, and that's why he's probably alighted on it. The idea in the late 60s and early 70s, I think it was Harold Wilson who first used it. The gnomes of Zurich encapsulates the idea of distant money men in the dark who aren't politically accountable, but who can really determine what governments can and cannot do. In 1976, when the UK was bailed out by the International Monetary Fund, we went, quotes, cap in hand. I know you're a student of that period, Tom. You know a lot more about it than most people my age. It was, in the pubs and clubs of Britain at the time, I was 7 and 8 years old, I was hearing people saying, oh, it's the gnomes of Zurich, they don't like what we're doing.
We have only a minute left on programme, so, John, I really do want to get your final thoughts on this conversation.
OK, key thing for us is very simply this. This was a really missed opportunity for growth. Growth is hugely important for the UK economy, for businesses and for people. And what we've actually done is chosen austerity again instead, which is job cuts, spending cuts, higher interest rates and a declining economy. It's a very, very big mistake on the part of the political class that they've thrown out the one opportunity for growth. Totally unnecessary, as has been said this morning. Really, the root cause was spending on lockdown, furlough and on net zero. Those things have built up a huge debt. There were alternatives to that, and the net zero thing really needs to be resolved, and nobody's talking about it. And the political class will not deal with it.
Well, John, we really appreciate your view this morning. Sorry we couldn't have longer, but we are at the end of the programme now. Up next, we have continued coverage of this morning's extraordinary developments, with, of course, the Chancellor's statement expected first, his smaller statement expected just after 11. Of course, there will be a statement to the Commons that we expect 3:30 as well. I'll be presenting the next 2 hours. Liam will be by my side offering the expert analysis that we really do require at times like these. Do not go anywhere. We'll see you after the break.
Looking ahead to today's weather, and the UK is looking windy across northern areas with showers. Elsewhere, prolonged sunny spells with rain soon clearing. Let's take a look at the details. So across the south and west, it will be dry with plenty of sunshine during the morning, although some high-level cloud will lead to slightly hazier skies at times. Any early rain will soon clear the south and east with plenty of sunshine developing. Southwesterly winds mostly light, top temperatures reaching 17 Celsius. Dry and windy across Wales with sunny spells, some cloudy, but maybe thick enough to give the odd light shower over high ground. Fine and dry with prolonged sunny spells for all during the morning, although skies may turn hazier at times, and winds will pick up during the morning with gustier conditions developing into the afternoon. Dry with prolonged sunny spells, particularly across the east of the area. It'll become windy across the region from late morning with gusts perhaps reaching 50 miles per hour, especially across high ground later. Windy with showers or longer spells of rain continuing to affect much of Scotland. The weather will improve a little across southern Scotland into the afternoon with some brighter spells developing. And across Northern Ireland, it will be very windy with coastal gales. Showers continue to affect western counties during the morning, but these should ease and become less frequent later. So a decent autumn day across much of England and Wales, but some gusty conditions with showers continuing elsewhere.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Good morning, this is To The Point on GB News with me, Tom Harwood, with continued coverage this morning of the Chancellor's extraordinary intervention. We're on your TV, radio and online. We'll have live coverage throughout this morning as Jeremy Hunt rips apart the Prime Minister's tax-cutting plans and appeals to the markets with fiscal consolidation. By my side through it all is Liam Halligan, but make sure you get in touch with your views as usual on gbviews at gbnews.uk. As the Chancellor takes charge, is time up for Liz Truss? Well, let us know. We'll be getting to those comments throughout the show. But first, it's time for the headlines.
A very good morning. 2 minutes past 10. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date today on GB News. The newly appointed Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, is preparing to deliver parts of his medium-term economic plan today.